Welcome to Chapter 4 of Glamador's DFO Sprite Editing video tutorial series. Today we'll be discussing replacing DFO resources with other DFO resources, and methods for arranging sprites in their correct coordinate placement without needing to have DFO open. Now, first step in any mod, as always, is to open up your Nexon DFO Image Packs 2 folder and figure out what sprites you'll be working with. Now today I'm going to be redoing another old mod of mine, the Panzer Hodor Succubus mod. So, keeping that in mind, we're looking for a sprite underscore monster. In this case, sprite underscore monster goblin, which we will copy and rename goblin 2, and goblin equipment, which we will copy and rename goblin equipment 2. Now we can open up our DNF extractor and take a look at our new Goblin 2. The next step in the process is to determine which of these images we're going to be editing. Each of these body types is a different kind of goblin. Panzer Hodor is body number 9, which you can tell by his color palette and his serious jawline. Most of the other goblins are baring their teeth, as you can see, but not Hodor. He's a man. Anyhow, our next step in the process is to save all of the pics in Hodor's file, because we need to match these to sprites in our succubus file, for which we will open up a second copy of the extractor, for reasons you'll see later. Now I know already that we're looking for monster underscore succubus. Here's the purple succubus, or you can use the lime succubus, either one. I use the purple because I think it looks better. We're also going to save all the pics from this one. Hop into NPK extractions and open up both folders side by side. We also need to save the trident, which we're going to use for later on. Now over here, we're looking at body 9. These are all the sprites relevant to Panzer Hodor. You'll notice there are 19 items. Now, it seems strange to you because there's an index 19, and you figure, I thought that meant there had to be 20 items, but no. You'll notice over here that Panzer Hodor has 2 linked frames, 17 and 20. Now, those are natural. That's been done by DFO, not by me. So we have to sort of work around that to squeeze the frames in there. You'll notice that these frames are linked with frames 1 and 4, because this is just Panzer Hodor's swing animation, but with 2 frames replaced with an open palm instead of a closed one, for holding his weapon, you see. Similar, but not quite the same. These two, however, are identical. The rearing up and the follow-through are the same in both of these animations. Now, we cannot get rid of linked frames. Once frames are linked, you cannot change that for anything. So you have to go ahead and work around that when doing your sprite modifications. Unless you pull a little trick that I'm going to show you later in the video. For now, we'll do it the old way, the way I did it originally. Now, we need to find sprites over here in the succubus file that match those in the Hodor file. Now, we have to pick out some 16 distinct animations that we're going to use for this. I say 16 because the succubus doesn't really have any different animations for an open hand versus a closed hand attack. So we're going to go ahead and complete the job and link these 2 layers with their corresponding attack layers. So you complete the set 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it looks exactly the same, and we only need to pick out the 17 frames, 0 through 16, instead of trying to work in those other 2 as well. When using the replace all in replacement map, it will only replace as many as there are unlinked layers. If you have linked layers, you can safely ignore any number that is linked. So we only need to have 0 through 16 in our folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder here, name it anything you like. I'm going to call it God. And we're going to start picking out layers that work for these animations. So we need a standing animation. Looks like 23 will work for that, so we go ahead and put that in our folder. Then we need our 4-frame swing animation. So what are we going to use for that? How about 10, 11, 13, and 14? That looks fairly smooth. So go ahead and copy those in there as well. Now, once you've got all these done, you're going to need to start renaming them to match the frames you want them to replace. In this case, frames 0 through 4. Whoops. There. Now, we continue this process until we've got all of the layers, or all of the frames, I'm sorry, replaced. I'm still thinking in Photoshop speak. Now, thankfully, you know this is like a cooking show, I've already done most of the hard work for you. So we've got these 16 frames that I've chosen that we're going to replace in Panzer Hodor. So we can go ahead and replace all resources, 32-bit, with NPK extractions, Goblin 2, Succubus. Done. Now that put us a little over the limit, but that's okay, because we renamed it 2, and that's not going to be a problem. Go ahead and hit animation, and you'll notice that while they are all in the right order, things look a little bit wonky, don't they? Look at how she wiggles. Now, this is a little bit easier and a little bit harder than what we did before. In Chapter 3, in Chapter 2, I showed you how to replace the RX-78 with a Metul, which is a completely foreign sprite map. We didn't have any coordinates to go off of as a reference. However, we do have coordinates as a reference for this. They're already right here in succubus.npk. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do is a little trick that I call scripting. And the trick here is that we're going to click Modify Texture Resource, and then just go ahead and hit Enter. And you're going to do that for each of the frames in succubus.npk. And you'll see why in a moment. I won't bore you by clicking on all of these, but you'll see why. Now we go up here to Edit and click View Run the Script. Now this is the Extractor scripting window. It opens up as a little mini window inside the Extractor here. And you'll notice that every action that we took to modify the NPK since we opened it is logged here in the script. Now all you have to do is modify these numbers on screen, these ones right here, to match the ones that we have in our little succubus file here. Now we're going to go ahead and look at both of these folders side by side, the one for the Hodor and the original, and sort of mix and match the numbers in the script so that we have to do comparatively less work in terms of overall typing. So frame 0 in the original succubus. Ooh. Ha! Looking at the wrong folder. There we go. Alright, so frame 0 in the original succubus is frame 5 in our Hodor succubus. So we go ahead and change this 0 to a 5. Frame 2, or frame 1, of our succubus file is 6, and then 2 is 7. So we go ahead and rename this to 6 and 7. But we've got 2 more sprites that we've copied for his downed animation, so go ahead and copy that line twice, so that we have a spot there for 8 and 9. Alright, frame number 3 is actually not used at all. 3, 4, 5 are not used. So we can go ahead and delete those completely. 6 and 7 are part of our walking animation, frames 11 and 12. So we go ahead and rename those 11 and 12, and so on and so on. I didn't do the entire file because that takes far too long. Once you've done that, go ahead and copy the whole thing into a text document, as I have here. And then we can go ahead and hit Quit. Now once we've got all these lined up like this, I can go ahead and copy this whole thing back in our other window. Although, intermediary step. Normally, you would only be doing this after working with a correctly sized frame. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is close this out and then reopen it in our other window here. This way the numbers are gray. It won't do anything with scripting unless the file sizes match. So we just had to make sure that we opened it again to make sure those numbers are no longer red or blue. But we notice that body 9 is still a succubus with all the layers linked properly. So we're going to go ahead and run the script. You'll notice it still saves the same script as we had before. But I always like to copy it in the notepad just in case, because if we had closed this window instead of the other window, that would not have shown up again. It was a happy coincidence, so don't get used to it. And run the script. Oh, ha! My bad. In renaming, I forgot to write down that we're not in succubus anymore. We're in goblin. There we go. Got to be careful of this, because when I renamed here, we're gonna. It said before that we were opening Sprite Monster Succubus. I renamed that to Goblin 2 and changed the image file to Body 9, but I neglected to rename the Succubus section to Goblin, so got to be careful with that. Scripting is all about the details. You put a number out of place and all of a sudden the whole thing's wrong. Anyhow, now in Body 9, you'll notice that she behaves exactly as she did way back when, except for, what is this little hiccup here? Oh, there it is. Now that's because frames 15 and 16 are something that I created myself by copying 2 parts of the 4-frame hover animation for the succubus. You'll notice that Hodor, unlike the succubus, has a 6-frame walk animation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 11 through 16. So we need to sort of expand this, 6, 7, 8, 9, into a 6-frame animation. Now, the way I did that was simple. I just copied 2 of the frames that we already had and put them slightly out of order so that it would look like a solid loop. Now, I don't actually know which frames those were off the top of my head, so we're going to have to do a little bit of experimentation here. Put them in one of these. There's only 4 choices to mess with in the y-axis, so it's not going to be too much of a big deal. Let's try 120 for now. And down here, we'll try 118. There we go. Alright. Now you'll notice it's a pretty solid loop there. And if you want to check if your loop looks solid, you can go ahead and check these little boxes here. Well, first you want to do is check to remove all frames, so that there are no frames checked. And then you go ahead and check the boxes that you're interested in. Right-click and check the frame animated GIF output. It's a more broken English, and depending on your translation it'll say something different. But it's the bottom option when you right-click on something. Now that popped up in Body 9 a GIF image, which we can open up and see that it is, in fact, a solid loop. She bobs up and down, she looks like she's sliding smoothly, so I did that correctly. Anyways, now that we've got all of her animations in place, we need to begin the process of positioning her in the same vein as Body 9 was originally. And you remember how we did that from the last time. Modify coordinates, modify all coordinates. Be sure to check the relative coordinates box, otherwise we'll be messing up all sorts of shit. And she was a little far to the right and a little far down, so we're going to go ahead and minus 40 on both sides. Now she's a lot closer. Needs to be a little bit further to the left. Relative, modify, don't bother with the y, minus 15. Ah, that looks almost perfect, doesn't it? I think that's good enough. Yep, everything seems to be working smoothly. So now that we've got, move on to Goblin Equipment. Open up a second window again. You'll see why in a second. And we want to now go to Goblin Equipment 2.npk. Now you'll notice that Hodor was naked. when we first saved his files here. Don't need that anymore. So we're going to need to get rid of his clothing as well, because the succubus has hers built in. Now, just as this was body 9, everything in goblin equipment with a 9 on it belongs to Hodor. GCC9 here, these are the 3 pieces of his body armor, so we're going to go ahead and hide all of those. Minor nitpicky element of the extractor: if you right-click on something anywhere in the image list, it does not select it. It only goes based off of what you last left-clicked on. So in order to hide these, you have to left-click, right-click, hide all map. Left-click, right-click, hide all map. Left-click, right-click, hide all map. It's annoying, but keep it in mind, because if you keep on hiding the same map over and over again, you get a little frustrated. Now, also HCC9, that's his little head ponytail. Gonna hide that as well. And I think that, nope, BCC9, his loincloth. We need to hide that as well. Excellent. Now we have a lot of space to work with now, since we hid all those bits there. So weapon 9 is going to be a little bit different, because you'll notice that weapon 9 has a lot of linked frames. More linked frames than the other ones did. You'll see that it's not present in frames 18, 19, or 20. That's because Hodor's weapon goes away. It's not in his hand when he's throwing rocks like this. Obviously, he's using his weapon hand in order to throw the rocks, so the game just puts the weapon into his hammer space. Does Hodor have pockets? We don't know. They're not big enough to hold his weapon, so it just goes off into nowhere. Anyhow, you'll notice that 17 has been removed. It does not have a sprite. Now, the reason they did that is because in order to link a layer like this, you have to have an existing frame which has actual coordinates and an existence, even if the existence is nothing, 1 pixel of nothing. So keep that in mind when having your weapon there. If we're going to hide the succubus's weapon, we're going to have frame 17 be blank, just as it is here. But the rest of these frames, we have to go ahead and repeat the process of going through and picking, this time, which of the succubus's trident goes with the layers that we chose for Goblin. Now, that's not terribly difficult if you at all remember which frames we did, which you should, because when we were doing our little scripting ditty, you had to really familiarize yourself with which frame went with which frame of the succubus. So we're going to go ahead and do that again. I'm not going to do it on video because it's the exact same process as before and it's tedious. But suffice to say, a few of these things are going to go into a new folder called Goblin Trident or something. And we're going to go ahead and replace all, modify 32, find the directory. Now, I don't have the directory here with me because I've already done all that work and I don't feel like doing it again on camera. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace the image with the one I prepared earlier, weapon 9 final. There we go. Now you can see the weapon. Now, this may be your first encounter with these little missing bits inside of various sprites. Neopol did this to save space. Every bit of information takes up space, and they wanted to compress the game as much as possible. These blank spaces are where the sprite for the weapon overlaps with the sprite for the succubus. You can see here on frame 16 how she would be holding that in her idle pose. You see how it sort of goes across her back like that? Our new job is to make it so that this perfectly aligns with our sprite in the other NPK for succubus. And this is where my next trick of the video comes into play. Under normal circumstances, you might think you'd have to open up DFO and make tiny, tiny changes in the coordinate map so that you can tell where the little weapon is supposed to go. But you have a couple of things that you can do to sort of make life easier for yourself. Give yourself a bit of a starting point. Now, principal among them is you can go into your monster succubus.npk and make note of how far away each of these coordinates are from the original succubus coordinate. Make a note of that, write it down in a list, a notepad, have a calculator handy. Always have a calculator handy whenever messing with our sprite coordinates, because you're going to have to do quite a lot of arithmetic. Specifically here we see it's 125.84 for frame 0 versus 98.113. So 125 minus 98, they are 27 frames apart there, and 29 frames apart on the y-axis. So 27 and 29. Actually, that's wrong, because this one is in upward direction and this one is in a downward direction. So you're going to want to make one of those negative. A positive 27 and a negative 29 is the difference. So what you're going to go ahead and use that info for is to run that same exact script as we did before to change all of these coordinates, except that we're going to be changing weapon 9 instead. So back here with our copied script, run the script, paste. Now this time we're in goblin underscore equipment, and we're working with, you know what, I don't actually know what to do for that, so I'm going to do a handy dandy little modify ding so that we can open up the script and see a little sprite. There we go. Now we just copy that and put that right there, and then we can delete this bit that we had for testing. Now that simplifies matters dramatically. It's goblin slash equipment. The underscores become slashes when typed in to the script package. So go ahead and run that script. There we go. That was a warning because it was still blue. But now back in weapon 9, we'll see that this uses the correct animation frames based on the same relative frames that we used when we did our succubus animations, the same ones that we copied before. Now that's our starting point. From now on, we're going to adjust all of these 29 up and 27 up and 29 down. There we go. So right-click, modify texture coordinates, relative, all. We're going to move the 29 to the right and 27. I have got backwards again. 27 to the right and 29 upwards. Identified. Now that should, all things equal, have made this look like it should with the proper overlapping, and you won't be able to see any of these little gaps in the weapon, as you can see here. So if we've done this right, you will not see any gaps in game. But we can test this ourselves by doing a little bit of tricky business like this. What we're going to do is we're going to save this weapon file in a folder I've made called test folder, and then we're going to open up Goblin 2 again over here and save body 9 in the same place. Boom. There we go. Now I've redone my output directory so that when I click on save, it won't keep bumping me back to NPK extractions. You can go ahead and remove this bit after you're done with this, because it'll mess you up in future and everything will be saved into 4 test folder, and you don't want that. No. But for now, I did that so that we can hit save as, and it'll jump right there, because we're going to be saving and loading a lot in the next couple of minutes. Okay. Good. Now that we've got that, we're going to go ahead and replace any sprite here, doesn't matter, with our weapon 9. Now you'll notice there is something wrong here. Specifically, we edited the coordinates for this sprite somewhat too early. We didn't really want to do that. Now if you remember what we did before, we moved it 40 up and 55 to the left. There we go. Oh, but it's still not right. And you know, that's just one of the problems that you're going to run into doing this by yourself. You're going to have to sort of reposition it on your own until it looks correct. Because, and let me try to explain this, back in the succubus, it has an entirely different set of instructions to give to DFO about where the trident goes in relation to the succubus versus where Hodor's weapon goes in relation to Hodor. The two coordinate maps are not comparable, which is why we're going to run into a lot of errors that we're going to have to fix with minute adjustments when we do this. Specifically, want to move this one down a little bit and maybe 10 more to the right. Whoops. Down a bit. And 10 more to the left. Alright, so that's pretty close, but it's not perfect. Bring it down and left a bit more. And that's good enough for a test shot. Now we're going to go ahead and save this again as weapon 9. Our new weapon 9. And what that's going to do for us is this. I'm now going to familiarize you with the merge feature, which is this 5th option down in the right-click list. It says Elements, select the file A. Now, that is more poor translation on the part of my translation file. If you have a more recent one, that will probably say something along the lines of merge. But for now, it's Elements. So I'm going to hit Elements, and then I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to hit the same one again. You'll notice that there's a new indicator here saying a little arrow pointing towards body 9. Now, once you've clicked on 2 files, that will open up the merge window. It says put together at the top there. Now, you have a couple of options here, specifically which one do you want to be on top, so to speak. Now, in this case, that doesn't matter because the weapon file that we've got has gaps in it wherever it would overlap with the succubus. So we can just go ahead and hit identified. But if you wanted to think about it a little bit more, the weapon file is usually on top of the succubus when she's swinging and everything like that. So might want to keep that one on top. In this case, body 8 is our weapon. There we go. It'll automatically run all of that and combine the two in the same window. This is the biggest reason to look at actual coordinates versus not actual coordinates. Because if you look at actual coordinates, you can see relative to each other where they're going to go and position them. We never would have been able to get it even this close if we hadn't had that actual coordinates box checked. So we can see here that it's not quite right. It needs to be moved up and to the left a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and replace these with the backup files that we had from before. You'll notice that this file has now been completely erased. It was merged with this one before we put it back the way it was. So we need to replace this one with weapon 9 again as well. But this time we're going to modify the texture a little bit. Relative, all. Make sure these are checked every time. One errant click and you could screw up your entire day's work. Now thankfully we're saving this very often as an image file, so you won't go back more than a couple of minutes. But if you make a big mistake and change it all and then save over your previous file, you may have to redo this entire thing. So be very careful to check this and this every time. Now it needed to go a little bit to the left and a little bit up. Now then we save it again as weapon 9 and do the same process as before. Merge, merge, yes. Now that is perfect. What do you know? Oh, but now you see the problem that we've run into. Remember what I talked about with sprites not being compatible necessarily? The way that the weapon is attributed to the succubus is not the same way the weapon is attributed to Hodor. So when you merge these files, there are obviously going to be problems. And unfortunately, there is nothing I can do about this. You absolutely must adjust these by hand. There's really no quick way to do it. You need to look at each individual one, adjust it, and work from there. But thankfully, this process is extremely expedited by us having done this little merge trick, because we can see how they relate to one another in the window here without having to open up DFO. And anyone who's modified sprites before knows that opening up DFO, changing 2 pixels, getting it wrong, and then having to open up DFO again is not an experience you want to spend an afternoon doing. Now, you may use only half an afternoon doing it this way, but it will eventually work. Now, once you've got everything the way you want it, you go ahead and you reload body 9. But now body 8's gone. And we don't want that, because body 8 still needs to show up for all those red goblins in-game. So how do we get him back? We hid him. Where is he? Oh no, we've made a mistake. No, we haven't. Because this extractor has a handy-dandy backup feature. Restore from a backup directory. Yes. Now, it's exactly the way it was before we started. Now, keep in mind that it only saves a backup the very first time you open a file. If there exists a backup in the backup folder, it will not overwrite it every time you open up the file. So you can modify this as many times as you like and go back to the original, the way it was before you touched it. And that is put in a folder in your Nexon folder called Extractor Backup. The Extractor creates this folder and puts all of your originals inside this folder. This just gives you an idea of how many replacements I've worked on. Anyways, keep that in mind because it's very handy for doing this sort of thing. We go ahead and replace that. Body 9. Now we've got our succubus and our body 8. No harm done. We know the succubus is in the right position, but we still have to reposition the weapon. Now, thankfully, I've already done that for you because I have an existing weapon 9 over here in my succubus folder. Weapon 9 final. And that is going to work. And if you want proof for that, you can go over here, replace weapon 9 final, and pull our little merge ditty. Okay, I lied. But that's not because I screwed up. That's because way back in the beginning, when I was doing the repositioning of the body back and forth, I moved it like 2 pixels fewer to the left than I did when I originally did the sprite. When you do this, you'll have the sprite in this position from the beginning, so this little issue won't happen. But you can see that aside from 2 pixels difference, more or less, everything is in the right position. So go ahead and restore from backup. Replace. Body 9. And weapon 9 in this folder. Now again, you can ignore the red numbers because we renamed it to 2, so just exit. Make sure that weapon 9 hasn't changed anything it doesn't need to. The only things we've changed are weapon 9, and anything else with a 9 has been hidden. Done. Alright, so today you learned about scripting in the extractor. You learned about merging files and how it can be used to position sprites without needing to open up DFO, if a little bit haphazardly, and about using a DFO resource to pick the frames to replace a different DFO resource. Next time, we will be learning about using Photoshop and untrimmed frames to simplify coordinate placement, centering sprites, because you remember that the coordinate map is in the upper left, and scripting in the... Look at that. We finished that already today. So look forward to that in future.